All right, so ladies and gentlemen, Bob Atkinson is about to come on right now talking about living into oneness. And we are seriously going to ignite our philosophy, our spirituality, our beingness, and truly step into this present moment and everything that's available to us. Before that, let's talk about the sponsor message. If you are a leader, if you're an influencer, if you are a business owner, entrepreneur, and you want to get your message out to the world in a bigger way, you want to master your purpose, who you are, what you stand for, expand your presence so that anywhere you go, people notice you and they pay attention, and master and launch your grow your platform. That's the 21-day challenges. I'm focusing on that to help you do those things. Really get the ball moving, get some momentum, start the flow, start the progress, and truly ignite yourself so you can succeed like never before. Let me know when you are ready to ignite your 21-day challenge. Send me an email, chris@beyourgps.com, or find me on Facebook and message me there, facebook.com/th3burns. Next up is going to be the iTunes review of the week. And this week, let's see who it's by. It is by, actually, I don't have it on the screen, but I will grab it for you. So this week, it's by Becca Joyce. And Becca says, "This podcast is fire. Chris Burns, the host, always brings the energy, enthusiasms, and excitement. His passion for life and becoming your greatest possible self is contagious. He also brings on amazing guests from all different industries, so you will always learn something new and different each episode. Highly, highly recommend listening." Thanks so much, Becca. And if you are loving the show and you want to give us a review, you want to let us know what you love, what you want to see more of, go to beyourgps.com/iTunes, and you can give us a review there, or search Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self on the iTunes store, and you can give us a review like that. And I appreciate your feedback and helping us grow and keep this message getting out to more people, the GPS message. So like I said, Robert Atkinson's about to be on right now. I'm going to bring him on in just another minute. Before I read his intro, just make sure you grab a pen, grab a piece of paper, be ready to take notes, because this man has so much wisdom to share with you to really evolve yourself, to grow yourself, expand who you are, who you really are, your true self, and get tapped into that and tuned into that. So make sure you stay all the way through till the end, because you never know what one idea could really open everything up for you, so you see life in a whole new reality, a whole new way. Okay, so make sure you stay tuned. And let's introduce him, and then we will bring him on the screen. Robert Atkinson, PhD, author, educator, and developmental psychologist, has published 9 books. That is incredible. Oh my gosh. Including the 2017 Nautilus Book Award winner, The Story of Our Time, From Duality to Interconnectedness to Oneness, Mystic Journey, Getting to the Heart of Your Soul's Story, The Gift of Stories, and Year of Living Deeply, a memoir of 1969. He is an internationally recognized authority on life story interviewing, a pioneer in the techniques of personal myth-making and soul-making, a member of Evolutionary Leaders, and professor emeritus at the University of Southern Maine, and founding director of Story Commons, www.robertatkinson.net. And we're blessed to have him here with us today. Robert, are you ready to rock the house, sir?
Ready. Hey, Chris.
Ready. Awesome. You're now live on Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self. Thank you for being here and sharing with our audience your wisdom and all the amazing things that you've accomplished. 9 books. That's incredible. And I'm sure we're going to have a blast today. So thank you for being here. I appreciate you.
Yeah, it's great to be with you.
Awesome. Awesome. So we're going to dive right into the theme of the day, which is, who is your true self? So Bob, how would you respond to that question? What does that mean for you? Who is your true self?
Yeah, that's a good one to start off with. I mean, we usually think of who we are in terms of our experience from birth to death, but that's only really a small part of who we are, really, when we take the perspective of eternity, and so we're created as a soul that comes and becomes to journey with a body, and so those are the 2 aspects of ourselves, and we tend to forget about the soul part, or I mean, some people may, but not all of us do, of course, and when we remember and take the perspective of the soul, that gives us a perspective of eternity, not only where we came from, but where we're why we're here and where we're going from here. So there's so many references in the sacred traditions about coming from the Creator and returning to the Creator. And if we keep that context in mind, we become much more than we typically think of ourselves as in this form of a physical being here. So the spiritual aspect of it's first of all much more everlasting than the physical self is. And when we take that perspective of the eternal self or the soul, we begin to have a whole different perspective on what our purpose is here, and what our meaning, what the meaning of life is. So it's all about. It becomes then, with that perspective from the soul, it becomes a matter of what are the how we learn from every experience that we have in this lifetime, and how it's going to impact our lives, not just in the moment or even in the future of this life, but how it's going to impact our lives eternally as well. Yeah. So it's a matter of perspective, and if we take that larger, big picture, eternal perspective of who we really are, we'll remember that we came from the Creator and that we're returning to the Creator.
Yeah, and I love what you said there about when we look at these things, this who am I really? What is my true purpose? Who is my true self? The meaning of life changes, our perspective, how we look at life. Instead, I think one of the biggest ones that I've experienced is instead of being disconnected and someone else is outside of me and there's no relatability, now I see things that we're all connected. There's all oneness. So there's a lot more empathy and compassion for people when they do silly things that, for whatever reason, I don't understand or it might be difficult for me to understand. But when I remember that we're all connected, then I have a lot more grace and love and compassion, which makes my journey easier. Instead of being frustrated and getting angry and blaming and shaming and having guilt, then I'm able to forgive and heal and come forth with love.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so important to remember that once we have that perspective of the big picture and that we're in and part of an eternal process of evolving toward our true self, that gives us that awareness, that understanding, that consciousness gives us the perspective, as you said, that we are connected to everything. Yeah. And that's really what my book focuses on. It's about that process of moving from the consciousness of duality, which is what we're which is easiest for us in this world, to live with that consciousness of duality. But from that perspective of oneness, we not only gain that perspective and understanding that all things are interconnected, we can also then begin to live with a consciousness of oneness, which actively and in every way we interact with everything else around us connects us to not only each other, but the creation, the entire creation around us.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love this. I love it. It's a great conversation. I'm getting fired up already. So, Bob, can you tell us a little bit more about what your clients come to you for when people read your books? I mean, you've written 9 of them, so there's got to be a lot of different perspectives and just what people come to you for and on their journey. What's their purpose? What's their objective when they work with you or consume your works?
Yeah, that's kind of evolved over the years of my work and career as well. So I started out kind of focusing on helping people tell their life story, which, as I alluded to earlier, is usually a matter of looking at our lives from birth to death and everything in between. But over the years, I brought in my personal interest and experience in spiritual development, and I expanded that to the more inclusive, eternal perspective. And that's when I began working in the area of personal myth making and soul making. So when it comes to those two areas, especially soul making, that's when we begin to look at our lives totally differently from that eternal perspective. And there are so many guideposts and markers out there, and people who have come before, the great mystics, who have shown what the pathway looks like when we live the mystic way or the mystic journey. And so I've worked with those patterns, those blueprints, and developed a process for what I call soul making, which is looking at our life from an eternal perspective. And it's still very much about who we are in this life and what we're doing, what our purpose is, what our meaning is, but it brings in that eternal perspective, which broadens everything out, and also at the same time gives us that sense and awareness of our interconnectedness to everything. And then with my most recent book, 2017, I sort of shift that whole process from the personal level to the collective level. And it's also about, so we're also, each of us individually is living our own personal myth, while at the same time being part of a larger collective myth unfolding around us. And so part of my work has been helping people to connect their personal myth to the collective myth, or what I call the story of our time, which is the larger story that is also unfolding collectively all around us. And so being able to find the way in which our personal story connects to the way the larger story around us is unfolding is a really important piece of everyone's understanding who they really are.
Yeah, it's like it's the ability to celebrate our individuality and our uniqueness, and feel like we're a part, and also feel like we're a part of something bigger. It's to feel, but and I'm curious about that, because that's almost a duality perspective, isn't it? Like saying, on one hand, I am unique and different, and on the other hand, I am together and connected with the whole. So can they both exist at the same time? Is that part of oneness philosophy, to have both of those and they can exist at the same time and they're together? I'm curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the short answer is, yeah, they can and do exist at the same time. But when and how they each come into the picture for us depends on our perspective. So if we're looking at things from a consciousness of duality, that's the way everything's going to appear. We're going to come into contact with, I mean, everything that we come in contact with is going to be opposing forces. And there's so many, we can all think of endless pairs of opposites that we come in contact with all the time, but that's only because we're looking at those things that appear as opposites from a temporal perspective. If we shifted our perspective to the consciousness of oneness, that's when everything becomes one and interconnected. So it's a matter of our perspective, and the way. So even with the larger big picture perspective of oneness, our tendency is to break things down into parts or pieces. And that's when the opposing forces come into play, when we break down the whole into its pieces. So it's a matter of perspective again, where we're coming at it from, and also the important thing is being able to, first of all, knowing that we can and wanting to, and then practicing so that we're able to maintain that consciousness of oneness. And when we do that, the pairs that we see around us don't matter anymore. They don't have the same significance as they did when we're only functioning with a consciousness of duality. When we're aware of and able to live with and within the consciousness of oneness, then those opposing forces kind of go away because we see them as parts of a whole. And a perfect example of that, a pretty well-known example of that, is the yin and yang, which represent different forces within the same whole. and the same kind of thing with feminine and masculine.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at them as pairs, we tend to see how they create opposition and create difference. That's another huge piece of living with a consciousness of duality. That by its nature creates differences for us that we see all the time around us. And so if we can shift from that, seeing the pieces, to seeing the whole, it becomes a matter of recognizing that feminine and masculine are part of the same whole. And they are actually essential parts to create a larger whole. And both parts are necessary to bring about the whole that exists. So it's partly a choice. I mean, once we're aware of the difference between living with a consciousness of duality and living with a consciousness of oneness, then it becomes a matter of choice. Which one do we really want to live with?
So I hear the first step is awareness, being able to have the awareness that I used to, or normally I would think in the opposites, the yin and the yang, and the masculine and the feminine, and they're different and they're opposing forces. Now we're bringing in a new way to see things through oneness, so that we have a new relationship with these two different forces. And maybe they're not even different, but they're one and the same, depending on how we look at them. So I'm curious, how can we behaviorally start to act in a way that acknowledges and integrates the oneness?
Yeah, that's a really big piece. I mean, that, because like any other spiritual goal or a spiritual quest by itself, the goal of any of those efforts are to be able to live with and within what we're seeking to achieve or to find. Mm-hmm. And so it's a matter of really first recognizing what the experience of living or experiencing things with a consciousness of oneness is. Mm-hmm. And then once we have that awareness, that experience of that, then it's a process of finding some spiritual practice that helps us maintain that awareness in the moment and in every moment of our lives. So it becomes a matter of each individual choosing for themselves what the spiritual practice is that will help them most as who they are, stay on that path and stay with that consciousness. And so there are many common, well-known practices like meditation and yoga. And I mean, just take yoga as an example. That term really means union, which is, so there's a whole practice, a physical and a spiritual practice, to achieve and maintain a state of union. And that's one great way, one great practice to choose to do that, to maintain that, if we understand what it's all about, what its purpose is. And so prayer, meditation, yoga, they're all important, really good practices. In my book, I have an appendix, which is really a longer meditation called Living in Oneness. And that's a whole meditation that can be done regularly, like every other spiritual practice, to help maintain one's awareness of the consciousness of oneness. So it becomes a practice, and we can break those practices down into smaller components or pieces and see what works for us. I have another what could become a practice, or it's really more like an affirmation on my website, and that's called the Oneness Pledge. And that's a really simple way to try that would help to maintain the consciousness of oneness. And so the Oneness Pledge is, in all my thoughts and actions, I pledge to look on all things with the eye of oneness.
Mm.
And if we repeat that as a mantra or as an affirmation regularly, morning, noon, afternoon, evening, or daily, on a regular basis over time, we begin to see things with the eye of oneness rather than with the eye of duality.
Yeah.
So it's all a matter of finding and choosing and sticking with whatever practice works best for you.
Yeah. In terms of the really acting and behaving out of that paradigm of oneness and the perspective of oneness, what have you seen shift in people's worlds in their lives because of taking something like that on?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that manifests itself in people's lives and really changes who they are, how they behave in the world, and especially how they relate to others. So I think you mentioned that earlier. It does become a matter of changing, picking and sticking with a spiritual practice that will help us understand and live with a consciousness of oneness is about uh, uh, living into a way of being that changes the relationship we have with everything around us. It changes the relationship with the people that we're closest with, people that we may not have met yet, that we will meet. It changes our relationship to the strangers that we will meet. Because when we see the other as one with us, that eliminates the whole concept of the other. Because we're one. In a way, it's like we're both, just in a person-to-person relationship, we're kind of like, we can see ourselves as separate. And this is what the whole challenge really is about overcoming, moving beyond the illusion of separation. And this is what needs to happen on both an individual level and a collective level now. And my book talks about that our real challenge today is both individually and collectively moving beyond the illusion of separation to be able to recognize that humanity is one, or we're one human family. And not only one human family, but that all of us are one with the entire creation. So when we do that, it changes the relationships we have on a daily, moment-to-moment basis. We see each other not as another person, a separate being, but as another representation of the Creator who gave us this beautiful planet to live on together. So that's about that. That's one of the ways that we change is just the way we see and relate to each other and the creation that we're part of.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
And
So I want.
that really needs a huge change, a huge shift. It is in process now, and we're moving along toward that gradually. I have been for quite a while, but the thing is, we won't achieve the goals that we want to in the world, which have been goals forever, like peace on earth. That's been a goal of all the world's religions and spiritual traditions forever. But we're not going to get there until we begin to see and relate to each other differently. So it all also comes back to putting into practice the ageless, universal spiritual truths and principles like the Golden Rule and so many others.
Yeah. So I want to go back into your journey and hear about what were the distinctions that led up to you having this philosophy, so to speak. What were those pivotal moments that got you to oneness as your main message, as your purpose to share with the world? What was the pieces of wisdom, the things that shifted you to finally see the big picture?
Yeah, there's been a whole series of experiences in my life that have gotten me to where I am today, and I guess the short answer to that question would be to read my memoir, Year of Living Deeply, a memoir of 1969, because that's the year and the time when I began to experience all the things that really brought about a transformation of consciousness for me. But before that, I mean, I can go back to even the beginning of my life. I mean, when the day I was born, what had a huge influence on me, but I didn't even know it until later, because that was the day that the U.S. dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima.
Wow.
I was unaware of that, until much later, until I started my own process of self-reflection and discovery of what was true for me during college. But at that time, I had become, it became clear to me that my life has been and still is a subtle quest to find an elusive inner and outer peace. But another earlier influence on my life was when I was around 9 years old, when my grandmother came to live with us for part of the year. She came to live with us for a few months when I was about 9, and I became fascinated by her commitment to her spiritual life. She daily, read daily from the Bible in the upper room, and I didn't really understand it at the time, but my 9-year-old mind or heart somehow wanted to know more about what I couldn't grasp and what gave her a sense of devotion. And I didn't know it then, but what I observed from my grandmother was a difference, really made a difference to my soul. And so many years later, when I got to college and I started majoring in philosophy, one thing kind of led to another. And that kind of brings us pretty much to where my memoir starts in 1969. But that was when that was really that's a story of transformation framed by the marker events of that year, in which I began to, for the first time, really experience that all things are interconnected. And that came about through my experiences of the moonwalk, which was the first time we were able to see the world, see the planet as one with no boundaries between us. And then also another event in 1969 was attending Woodstock and being there and really experiencing the sense of community and oneness that was created there among 500,000 people. And then another experience of that year for me was being the crew member on the maiden voyage of the Hudson River sloop Clearwater. That was the beginning. That's what initiated for me the beginning of an inner journey, where I began to experience the ageless universal motifs and archetypes. And I got to sail with Pete Seeger and many of the sloop singers of that time. And that led me from one thing to another, to visiting Arlo Guthrie at his farm in the Berkshires. And then later on that year, living as a guest in a Franciscan monastery. And also at the same time, during the same period, meeting Joseph Campbell, who became a mentor to me at that time. So those are all kind of the seeds for me for my own transformation of consciousness, which began then and has continued up to now, and really, I think, has taken full bloom in my 2017 book, The Story of Our Time. But I would encourage for anyone who's interested in those kinds of experiences that happen not only to me, but can happen to anyone, today. I would encourage people to read the memoir, which will be coming out April 2nd, the 50th anniversary edition. There's so much in there, not only about my own experiences, but about our common experiences as human beings that we all can have, like a call to adventure, like withdrawal, a withdrawal into the belly of the whale. So many archetypes like that we all can experience in our own situations and settings.
I'm curious, what do you feel that understanding the archetype that we are currently living or being, how does that help us understanding where we're at on the journey? How does that help us to be happier, more fulfilled human beings?
Yeah, that's a good one too. I mean, because it's all about understanding. I mean, once we do have either an understanding of or an experience of
Mhm.
the archetypes that I was referring to, then our understanding of them and our experience of them gives us much more meaning and also a sense of purpose in our own lives to integrate their meaning into our lives so that we can manifest what they're meant for. I mean, all those archetypes, like the call to adventure, being in the belly of the whale, and all those, they're meant to expand. They're first of all a call to destiny, and they're meant to expand our consciousness
Mm.
to in a way in which allows us to fulfill our life purpose.
Mm.
And at the same time, all of those archetypes that we can experience are about the and express the pattern of transformation in
Mm.
our lives.
Yeah.
So that's really important to understand. I mean, that it is a universal pattern, a timeless pattern that we can experience ourselves, and a cycle as well.
Mm.
And that there is, and that in experiencing that and allowing that to play out in our own lives, we're doing the same thing that creation is doing to itself every year
Mm.
through the cycle of the seasons. I mean, you know, um, wherever you want to begin, summer leads to fall, which leads to winter, which is a dormant inward time,
Mm-hmm.
which then leads to spring. Which, by the way, happy spring equinox to everyone today. And so with the spring, we know that it's a renewal time,
Mm.
and that's leading us to and not only repeats the cycle over again, it's leading us to that fullness of summer.
Mm.
So when we can recognize that we are living that pattern in our lives, we're also able to connect our own life story to the sacred stories, to the classic myths, and to the fairy tales of all the world's cultures.
Yeah.
And when we do that, we also begin to recognize the pattern and how that pattern is broken down. One of the ways that I like to uh, help people understand the pattern is to think of their lives as a recurring cycle of going from beginning to muddle to resolution.
Mm.
There's so many other variations of that same form, from like birth, death, and rebirth,
Right.
or separation, initiation, return.
Mm.
All those all those are different ways of describing the same pattern. But when we begin to understand the potential of our own lives in experiencing transformation, and knowing that we have to go through a muddle,
Mm.
which is a time of conflict, a time of chaos, a time of difficulty, that's we come to recognize that that's not only necessary,
Mm.
but it's the only thing that will lead us to a completion of the cycle, which is resolution. And so it's a process. When we go through those phases, beginning, muddle, and get to the resolution phase, that's when we know that the cycle of transformation has been completed in our lives, and we know then that we have a new sense of direction and purpose in our lives. And so that just to get back to your question, just knowing that pattern helps us understand it every time we experience it and go through it in our lives, because this is a pattern that does repeat itself over and over many times in our lives. Sometimes an experience of that pattern might be more important than other times, but the more we can learn from going through that pattern of what it is, what it's meant to bring about, not only the easier it'll become, but we'll also go through it with a greater sense of meaning and understanding, which will help get us through the whole process.
Yeah, I also hear faith, like faith that, oh, there's something bigger at work here. There's a pattern, many before me have gone through it. Many at the same time are going through it right now. Many in the future, we'll go through it. Everyone, right? Basically everyone. But when we think about those heroes that had tremendous difficulty and odds and muddle and these challenges, then we can have faith that we're not alone. There's something bigger at work here, and that it's not infinite. It's not forever that we will be quote unquote stuck at this challenge or this place. It's a part of the process. It's like the caterpillar turning into the cocoon, knowing that, hey, this is a part of the phase, a part of the process. Being a cocoon and having to work my way to break out of this shell to turn into the butterfly gives people resolution, gives people hope, gives people like, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and there's that faith that there's something bigger at work here. That's what I'm really getting from this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's so important to remember that about it, because when we do, we, as you said, we recognize ourselves as part of a greater whole, and that we're experiencing in our own lives the same thing that happens in the cycle of the seasons, and that happens with butterflies and all the other creatures on the planet. Yeah. It's all part of a bigger picture, and when we can place ourselves within that context, we can even enjoy the ride much more than we had thought we would ever be able to. So it's also about, and it does go back to faith, as you said. It's also a matter of recognizing that, and also coming to depend on and know that they will be there. Yeah. The spiritual forces that are at play, that are always at play and at work in the universe, guiding us toward the ultimate place that the Creator wants us to be able to get to. And so there are all these spiritual forces operating in conjunction with each other to help guide us toward that greater unity, which is beginning to come about now. And so it's important to recognize that pattern and the largeness, the inclusiveness of it on both the individual and the collective level. And so when things start looking like they're getting really bad around us, or whatever, whatever's going on in the world or the country at any moment, just being able to recognize that everything is a part of that transformational process, which will lead us to a resolution, which is going to bring us to a place that was even greater and more connected, a sense of greater connectedness and unity than we were before that period of the muddle. Being able to recognize that. And so at the same time, it's also about these cycles that are repeating themselves so many times over and over, both in our individual lives and our collective life. It's also important to recognize them as we understand the life cycle itself. We know that adolescence is a big part of the life cycle that represents, in a way, it can represent the muddle that we're collectively experiencing now, and also that maturity can represent the resolution. So that's another way of looking at where we are collectively as humanity approaches its age of maturity.
It's powerful. It's very, very powerful. I'm curious, if you had all the money in the world and you had, let's say, 2 weeks left on this planet to achieve a result, to impact the world in as big a way as possible, what would you do? How would you activate this oneness? How would you get the message out? How would you impact the world?
That's a really good question, and in a way, a bit of a trick question, because all the money in the world may not change things or get us to where we want to. if we don't want to get there ourselves individually and collectively.
Yeah.
So it becomes a matter of, as I mentioned before, it's really a matter of personal choice to choose the direction we want to go in. And that's going to take a lot more than 2 weeks. It could take, a couple of lifetimes, or who knows how long that process could take. But all the money in the world would help, but 2 weeks wouldn't be enough time, because it's a matter of to get to the promised destination for humanity, based on the truths of all the spiritual traditions forever, which is peace on earth. To get there as the goal, it's really going to take a change of heart, as well as a change of consciousness. So that's really what it comes down to. I mean, the crisis that we're in the midst of right now is a crisis of consciousness.
Yeah.
And we have to look at it that way in order to help ourselves and to be able to help others in whatever way we individually can help anyone else, to help first ourselves, then others, to bring about that change of heart and a choice to let go of really living with the consciousness of duality has had its time, and it's beyond, the overdue date is way beyond living with a consciousness of duality.
Yeah.
So that becomes a matter of choosing to live with a consciousness of oneness. And again, I'm not sure how money figures into that, but the more we can get this message out there through media. I mean, that's one of the great things about the media, the internet, the way we can use media today, like we're doing right now. And so more money would help get that message out there and to a wider and wider audience all the time. But again, it would probably take a lot more than a couple of weeks, a couple of lifetimes, who knows. But at the same time, I don't want to make it sound too overwhelming, because there's a possibility there. I mean, first of all, what we're talking about is not only possible, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
And so we know that it's going to happen. And when it happens depends on how much and how quickly and how many of us make that shift from a consciousness of duality to really choose to live with and by a consciousness of oneness.
Yeah.
So that could happen. There are a lot of organizations out there that are, this is another interesting thing about the time that we're living in right now, this moment. There are so many organizations, individuals and organizations and communities of all kinds, sacred, spiritual, secular, all kinds of organizations that are coming together to work for the same purpose of bringing about this ideal goal. And one of the things that's happening in that process is that there's being created these networks of networks, and affiliations of affiliations that we hadn't ever dreamed of before, because now it's possible technologically for that to happen. And many of those organizations that are coming together as networks of networks are putting out there that this is not only possible, but our goal is to do it by 2030. That's only 10 years from now. And the thing is, if we individually and collectively choose to live by a consciousness of oneness, it could happen in 10, 11 years. So it's not necessarily a matter of a lifetime or two. It could be a matter of a decade or so.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that there has to be some kind of catalyst, some kind of facilitation of people to want to choose oneness. And I think that there's a couple different things that came to my mind. The power of forgiveness is super, super huge. When people see others forgiving, when there's huge, like horrendous crimes that have been committed, and atrocities, and the people like Nelson Mandela, who was in prison for a long time, like unjustly, or just he forgave. He came out and had this big heart, and he was able to forgive, and that was an inspiration for people around him. So I think we were able to share more stories of forgiveness, of healing, of releasing and processing shame and guilt and trauma. I think when I asked you that question, I was like, well, what if we could pay everyone's salaries so everyone showed up to like a seminar or a process where they get to just express all their rage, all their frustration in a safe, healthy way, and at the end they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel loved, and then now they're open to hearing about a new, better way. It's like, hey, you did that. You carried that trauma. You did that for decades. Now there's a better way. And I think that these networks are facilitating people to say, hey, you don't have to hold on to that. Here's how you can process those emotions and that old limiting paradigm, and then step into a new one.
Right, exactly. And so there are a lot of organizations in existence now around forgiveness, around kindness, around dignity. I mean, there was recently a global dignity forum, and so there's things like that where people come and what you just described happens. But the thing about all of those, and I mean, first of all, to focus on all of those essential, basic, fundamental human virtues, like forgiveness and all the others, kindness, compassion, people have to be open to wanting to experience them, to live them, to incorporate that way of being into their lives. And so in one sense, all the money in the world might help, but in order for all the people in the world to be willing to come to a seminar or forum, whatever it might be, to help change them, they have to first be open to coming to that. And, unfortunately, one of the biggest hurdles we have in this world right now, today, is opening people's minds and hearts that are not ready for that yet, to be able to first open their hearts and minds and souls to wanting to come to those kinds of events that can be transformative for them.
Yeah, I almost thought if you help them get what they want, they want to express their frustration. They want revenge. Some of these people, their soul, their being, they want revenge. They want the other person to suffer. If there's any way that they could express that in a healthy way, I wonder if that would, help them get what they want, so they can, instead of depressing all the trauma and the emotions and the pain, let it free. And when they're free, now they're a open, empty vessel, so to speak, to be poured into in the love if they choose so.
Yeah, that can be done, and that can be a really powerful, transformative experience. And again, people have to first have their hearts open to want to be able to even try something like that. And some of it, unfortunately, there are people that are closed off to that. They think that, it's hard to, I don't want to categorize everything, because that's not a part of living in oneness. But there are so many ways in which people are kind of stuck in and with a consciousness of duality. And it would be, there are probably many different ways for whoever happens to be stuck in a consciousness of duality, without recognizing the possibility of anything else, being able to get beyond that. Once they've reached the point of opening their heart to something different and really wanting to let go of the pain and the struggle and the suffering that they've experienced, then that openness in their heart is what will lead them to their transformation as well.
Hmm.
And that's but you're definitely on the right track with that. There's got to be something, some way to as I mentioned, there are these spiritual forces out there all the time, always have been, that are guiding us toward unity. And at the same time, there needs to be more specific and direct ways in which individuals who might not be there yet or might not think they're ready yet to be brought around to opening up to a new possibility, a new way of seeing things with the eye of oneness.
Yeah. And I think it's all through living the example, right? Being the demonstration of it, so that when it's like when you see someone who used to have so much resentment and anger and frustration, all of a sudden you see them again, you meet them again, and now they're light and shining and happy and smiling. You say, what the heck happened to you? And then they share, I chose this different path. I chose to release what I was holding on to. And I think that it's when we have people around us who we love, who we trust, who we respect, who are close to us, and we see them living the example, we see them happy, smiling, whatever, transformed, then it creates curiosity. It creates possibility within us that maybe I can have that too. If he got it, maybe I can have it. And I think that's the biggest thing. And also knowing that there's these guiding forces, knowing, like, to remind people that it's not just them as a body, as a husk, so to speak, this flesh bag that goes through life and then you die and then you're done, nothing else. No, it's like there's something bigger that we're a part of, God, oneness, that we're always connected with. We always have been, we always will be. And to be able to explain it to them in a way that doesn't turn them off or doesn't go with their current belief pattern or paradigm. And that's, I think, the mastery of communication, and meeting them where they're at and showing them how to get what they want while still dealing with their current level of consciousness and taking them up one level at a time.
Yeah, for sure. That's really important. And I think what's clear is that there are, and what's really encouraging is that there are so many wonderful stories of transformation out there and around, that we need to identify and honor and highlight, put those stories of transformation out there so that others can become transformed by them. And that's the kind of thing that will spread this and help the world make the shift from a consciousness of duality to a consciousness of oneness, is when we see others out there that have had the experience of transformation and have moved to this sense awareness of oneness. And when that, as we see those kinds of examples out there more and more, that's going to create so many more like examples from those. And this really gets kind of back to one of the things that I talk about in the book about how important the spiritual life is, because that's a big part of what we're talking about is first of all being aware that there is such a thing as a spiritual life. And when we start out on that, in that direction, that represents the awakening of love or a fervor of the soul. And this happens as we glimpse traces of the eternal truth of oneness in the universe. So love is that force that directs the movement of the planets, the supreme force of the universe. And love is the force that connects all beings and all things in the creation. We're made for transcending the illusion of separation and for caring for whom we're connected to. We've been hardwired to connect, to cooperate, and to be empathic. So the overriding rule of natural selection is not survival of the fittest and evolution too, but it's really generalized reciprocity or reciprocal altruism. Yeah. So it brings us right back to love as the most powerful attractive force in the entire universe. And when we begin to go down the spiritual path and open ourselves up to living a spiritual life, this is where we end up. and because love is the only force that can eliminate all forms of prejudice. It's really the safeguard of human diversity, and that there's a transformative power in love that makes it clear that we're all one human family, which is now an understanding that's necessary for our own survival.
I love it. I love it. And when you were saying that, the picture came to mind of how people have their own journey, their own story, their own difficulties, their own challenges that they've gone through, which help them develop skills and abilities, which are then their gifts. And even from birth, they're given gifts and, guided along the life. Each and every one of us have our own gifts that are developed and cultivated through our life experiences. And we all have those gifts for a reason, to serve our fellow man, our fellow human beings around us with the gifts, with the experience, with the abilities that we have that make us special, and not disconnected, but special in that we see the world a certain way, a perspective, still with oneness. But like our mannerisms and our behaviors are different than someone else's. So we're able to bring a different perspective or a different value to the table to create a more cohesive whole together.
That's exactly what's happening right now. I mean, we're the thing about the time that we're living in is that there's so much happening on both sides, from one side of one extreme of the continuum to the other. And it's important to keep focused and to keep our eye on the prize and to be able to live with seeing all things with the eye of oneness. This kind of goes back to the oneness pledge, but that's what is going to add to the movement, the global movement that's already building. There's already a culture of oneness being built in the world by all these organizations and communities that we talked about before. There's literally thousands of communities of action, organizations and groups that are already working to build a culture of oneness, each in their own way, through a variety of approaches. And all of these are becoming more unified and not only aware of what each other is doing, but are joining forces more often now than ever before. And just one example of that happening in a totally spontaneous way is as the recent, actually it was January of 2017, the first Women's March, which was a spontaneous global event taking place in nearly 40 countries, which expressed solidarity on 7 continents at the same time. And that represented the forces of unity and oneness. So it's becoming clearer now that all the causes of the past couple of centuries, especially the last half a century, all the human rights issues are converging as the global movement of our time into building a culture of oneness. That's really what it's all about right now. And it's happening every day, every moment.
Yes, it is. And you're a freaking pioneer for it, Robert. So I appreciate you, man. We want to know, how do we stay connected? What's the next steps that our audience can take to get more information about really stepping into their own oneness consciousness and paradigm and being able to share that with others too?
Yeah, probably the best way would be to check out my website, www.robertatkinson.net. And there's lots of what we talked about on there and more. You can take the Oneness Pledge on my website. You can get my book and do the meditation on living in oneness and much more on the website.
Awesome. So everyone go to www.robertatkinson.net and get more of this gold, more of this enlightenment and awakening and consciousness, elevation. Bob, I appreciate you, man. You're just doing amazing work in the world, and just keep showing up, keep sharing the message, and it's getting out there. I love the power of media, podcasts, Facebook. It's incredible what we have, and you're sending out the message in all the right places. So keep up the amazing creation and living your purpose. It's beautiful to witness.
Thanks, Chris, and great work you're doing. Keep it up yourself.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate you. We'll see you soon, okay?
Okay, we'll see you.